Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our latest edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's doing well and is looking forward to a great weekend. We're starting to get our warmer Florida weather, but it's always better to be warm than cold. Today, I thought I'd go over a few things. We're going to change the order slightly. Let's go over a little bit about sports to start with, because it's fresh on my mind. NBA basketball is probably at the forefront of what we're following sports-wise. The playoffs now, they're starting to get really interesting. They're in the second round, nearing the conference finals. So 2 of the second round matchups have been completed. The New York Knicks crushed the Philadelphia 76ers 4-0. So they've moved on to the conference final. And they'll be facing the winner of the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Detroit Pistons. This series has been quite interesting. Detroit started off ahead 2-0, but the Cavaliers have come back, and they just won last night, so now they're ahead 3-2, and this is a best-of-7 series. So the winner of this series will face the Knicks. The Knicks right now are playing outstanding basketball. So at this point, the Knicks should be a fairly significant favorite, even though the Pistons were the first-ranked team in the East during the year. The Knicks are just playing very well right now. So keep an eye on that series. In the West, which is where we have the 2 big dogs, so to speak, the Oklahoma City Thunder swept the Los Angeles Lakers 4-0. The Lakers put up a valiant effort in spite of the 4-0. They were without their best player, Luka Doncic, and also their second best player, Reeves, only came back for the latter part of this series, and he was coming off an injury. So they were basically carried by the 41-year-old superstar, LeBron James, and he played very well for a 41-year-old player, but they were just outmanned in this series. The Thunder is a very well-coached team. They have the best player in the league, arguably, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have inordinate amount of depth. Their players are young, hungry. They're the defending champions. So they look outstanding. The other series is the San Antonio Spurs versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves have put up a valiant fight so far. The Spurs are leading 3-2 going into Game 6. So again, this is a best-of-7 series. Assuming the Spurs win, they'll play the Thunder, and this has been the long-awaited duel. When the playoffs started, I went with my original pick, and I picked the San Antonio Spurs, even though it would be a significant upset if they beat the Thunder. But I've got to be true to my picks, and I'll stick with them. They're led by the 7'6" phenom Victor Wembanyama, and they have some good young players. Overall, the Thunder has a deeper roster, but you never know. Victor Wembanyama could really change things. So keep an eye on that. And then I do believe that it'll end up being the Knicks on the East in the finals versus either the Thunder or the Spurs. And I do think either the Spurs or the Thunder will beat the Knicks in the finals. Last but not least on the sports is baseball. I did want to have one brief mention. The local team, so to speak, the Tampa Bay Rays, who were projected to be a very mediocre team this year. You know, one of the Rays' drawbacks is they have a horrible stadium to play in. It's not well located. They've consistently not drawn well in that venue. And it affects how they run their team because they have one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. In fact, just to give you a frame of reference, the New York Yankees, the big Bronx Bombers, their payroll is probably 3 to 4 times the Rays. So the Rays' success over the past 10 years has really been nothing short of miraculous when you consider they're playing with one arm behind their back. But this year, they've gotten rid of some additional players, and the players they had acquired, for the most part, nobody had ever heard of. But they've been on a real hot streak, and believe it or not, They have the second best record in baseball. And in their division, they're actually ahead of the Yankees by 3 or 4 games. I would be quite surprised if this holds up all season because the Rays really just don't have the roster skill that some of these top teams do. But so far, they've done a great job. And the one thing you've got to say about the Rays is they play hard, they play good defense, and they have arguably the best manager in baseball, Kevin Cash. So kudos to the Rays, and we'll keep an eye out on them. That's all for sports today. And let's transition to real estate, because this is Real Estate Tidbits. So I'll give you some statistical data and a prognosis. Well, what is the summer prognosis? Well, I've continually looked at this very minutely, so to speak, and I've raised my prognosis ever so slightly. So right now, I'm saying it's cautiously favorable. And why do I say that? Well, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, the Iranian conflict has caused a lot of consternation and worry for people and a lot of uncertainty. But in spite of that, real estate seems to be holding its own. And over the last couple weeks, it seems to be slightly picking up. So I'm cautiously optimistic that in spite of all the landmines we're facing, the next few months should be hopefully pretty solid. The one thing that I've definitely been finding in real estate is there are definitely buyers out there. But the big difference with the buyers that are out there right now, for the most part, they're much more methodical. They look at more homes. They take more time to make a final decision, and they frequently expect to negotiate more. Also, on a few occasions, I've had some buyers that have done what I call really multiple inspections. In fact, I had one customer on one of my listings. He actually paid 3 or 4 different inspectors. They had a structural inspection, which is obviously typical. They had a second company do a termite inspection. They had a third company do a sprinkler inspection. And they had a fourth company do a plumbing and sewer inspection. And that last one in particular was something that I haven't experienced. Not that it was a bad idea by that customer, but usually they don't go to the length of hiring a plumbing company to do kind of an invasive sewer inspection, which would include some various techniques, including putting cameras down your plumbing and sewer lines to determining its current condition. So these inspections took multiple hours, but fortunately overall they came out pretty satisfactorily, and we're moving on that transaction. But I bring that up just because people are being a lot more fastidious and meticulous in their decision making. And I think a lot of that not only is due to the Iranian conflict, but I just think it's due to society. You heard me talk last week about credibility and integrity and stuff. And I think increasingly more people are skeptical. They just don't believe as much. They feel that maybe people are hiding things, and they just don't want to buy something that they come to regret because maybe it had problems that weren't detected. So those things are combining for a much more distrustful environment. And I correlate that to some things that I said the last couple of weeks when I talked about integrity and credibility. And this is not, I'm not going to repeat myself about how our government can't be trusted nowadays, but some of the unusual behaviors and again, how this causes people to kind of question what direction not only our country's going, but what our society is. You may have recalled that there was a lot of negative publicity about FEMA when our current administration took over. They were talking about cutting FEMA back, funding it less, how it maybe wasn't functioning very well, how maybe it wasn't as worthwhile, etc. And for those of you that are not familiar with FEMA is a branch of the government that really their focus is on when we have major weather-related catastrophes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, things of that nature, that can decimate communities and can cause a lot of individual damage to homeowners, etc. So they're there to try to assist and facilitate helping in the recovery, giving people government funds that really lost everything and that sort of thing. We've experienced quite a bit of that in Florida, especially in the southwest coast over the last few years, with all the damage that the hurricanes caused between Tampa's and the Fort Myers area. And if you'll recall, interestingly, our governor has railed against the federal government, but when it came to the hurricane damage, they willingly accepted funds from FEMA. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy that went on in Florida. But insofar as our president and current administration, they were less than complimentary about FEMA. So they hired a Navy SEAL to take over FEMA when they got in office. And evidently, he came out with some comments that said that he felt that FEMA was a very necessary division, and I guess in some fashion contradicted what President Trump had said about FEMA. So what did President Trump do? If you don't agree with President Trump, you're not in a good situation. So he fired the gentleman. Now, a year later, where there's a lot of sentiment that FEMA is definitely needed by both sides of the aisle, in other words, Republicans as well as Democrats. And I guess the head of FEMA that they had appointed wasn't looked on as being very good in his position or giving people confidence that they would effectively deal with these type of environmental disasters. President Trump went and rehired the person he had fired a year ago. So what that tells me is that President Trump changes his mind like you and I change socks. It's very disconcerting. He'll tell you one thing one day and then he'll do something completely contrary after that. And when it comes to running the country, determining if we're going to war with people, there's just a lot of things. This ballroom that we're spending a ton of money on, he first said it was all private donations. Now it's coming out that there's a lot of government money that's going into it. And you can argue the merit of that. But I guess what I would say as a citizen, what am I more concerned about, having gold-plated ballroom or having adequate health care for our citizens? That's just an easy example. I just think we have tremendous misplaced priorities. This gentleman wants to leave a legacy, meaning that buildings, monuments, statues, all have his name affiliated with them, even though that has zero bearing on whether he's been a good president or not. I'll let history decide his place, but I'm confident that I know what it's going to be already. So, again, I think all these things are interrelated, and it's too bad. And I'll give you one example of that. You know, I'm a person that's always seeking information. I used to enjoy debating politics, but I don't enjoy that any longer. But I try to stay well-versed on things, not only because I do a podcast, of course, but I just want to be informed. I want to have intelligent discussions. I want to have opinions. I want to hopefully motivate my kids to want to stay informed. And so I'm a pretty voracious reader, and I used to watch a lot of news so that I could try to stay informed and form my own opinions. But I think nowadays we've morphed into one of two camps when it comes to news. There's a lot of people I talk to that watch no news because they don't want to see the news. They can't stand how much bad news is out there, and they can't stand that a lot of the stations that give the news out are very biased. For example, if you're a moderate or what they call a more liberal person, you don't trust anything that Fox News says because their news is very slanted to the right. If you're a more conservative person, you're probably very skeptical of watching MSNBC because you feel they're slanted to the left. The news people should be giving you the news. If it's factual, they should be able to give their opinions to some degree, but they just make stuff up. Like, for example, and this is probably the most famous incident over the last few years, Tucker Carlson, who was the most popular and highest paid guy on Fox News, finally came out, besides being terminated by Fox News, and said he was inventing stuff about, Trump and Biden just to get viewership. And he came out and said that he used to go along with Trump and say that the 2020 election was a dishonest election and all that. But then he finally came out and said he was only saying that because it was a popular thing with viewers. And so Fox News ended up getting sued and had to pay a lot of settlement money. And now Tucker Carlson's come out against Trump. But he's an example. He was the highest profile news commentator on the conservative side, and he admittedly lied about important things. And a lot of people in this country still believe that the 2020 elections were rigged because Trump said they were, but there's no evidence whatsoever. There was lawsuits in all these states, and they lost every lawsuit. The amount of not only lying, but distorting and slandering people is just incomprehensible. Is this the example we want to teach our children? And also, how are we looked at by other countries? They feel that we're kind of Looney Tunes over here, that you can't really trust what you hear, and that we're not really a coherent society. And we've lost the respect from many people as being the leader of the free world. We still have the most resources and the largest military, but a lot of people from other countries are not very trusting of us. And many of these were our allies. And in this type of global world, you can't do things alone. It's just not a viable strategy, either from getting effective results or not going bankrupt trying to fund all these different things if nobody else is helping you. So that's a little bit about my comparison between how these things are impacting real estate. Last but not least is where are the interest rates? Well, the interest rates for the most part have stabilized. They haven't come down like they would have, and hopefully they should have, due to the Iranian conflict. But after a brief upsurge, they seem to have flattened out, so we'll just have to keep an eye on them. Interest rates, for the most part, if you're looking at 30-year fixed-rate loans, again, it depends on the day of the week and what the upfront fees from the lenders are, et cetera. But they're hovering, give or take, somewhere in the 6.5 to 6.75 range. So not that that's great by standards of recency, but if you look historically, those rates are still not bad. But anyway, that's a little bit about these various categories. I hope everyone enjoys themselves, be safe, have a great weekend, enjoy our great weather. And this is Marty Kaiser out.